Get your hands off that jacket. That's not for people like you." The words landed across the showroom floor like a slap. Every head turned. The salesman's lip curled as he blocked the rack with his body, eyes dragging across the man in front of him. The scuffed boots, the faded canvas jacket, the calloused hands resting easy at his sides. "We have a sales section near the back. Maybe start there." The man didn't move, didn't blink. His name was Solomon Tate, and he had designed the jacket the salesman was protecting. 6 hours earlier, Solomon had been in the studio on the 23rd floor of a building he owned outright. No mortgage. His name on the deed, on the wall beside the elevator, on the brass plate beside the front door. The studio smelled like leather and linseed oil, the way it always had since he'd moved in 12 years ago with a sewing machine, $48, and no plan except to make something worth wearing. He stood at the window drinking black coffee, watching the city wake up below. His daughter had texted at 6:30. "Dad, you're doing the Caldwell Boutique inspection today. Wear something decent, please." He typed back, "If the clothes make the man, we've already failed." She sent back 3 eye-rolling emojis. He smiled and set the phone face down. Solomon Tate was 51 years old. He had a face that looked like it had seen weather. Not hardship, exactly, just time. The kind of face that didn't ask for anything and didn't apologize for existing. He kept his beard close, his head shaved since his 40s when the decision had felt like a relief rather than a loss. His hands were the hands of someone who had sewn, cut, hammered, and built long before he'd ever signed a contract or shaken hands in a boardroom. Tate Collective had started as a single jacket, literally one jacket, worn by a musician friend who posted one photo, and the phone rang for 6 days straight. That was 2013. Now, Tate Collective operated in 19 cities, held licensing deals with 3 major department chains, and had just closed a partnership with a European heritage brand that had been making outerwear since 1887. The deal had been on the cover of Business of Fashion for 2 weeks. Solomon had not been photographed for that cover. He'd sent his creative director instead. He didn't like cameras. He liked fabric. He pulled on a pair of dark chinos this morning, a plain white Henley, the canvas jacket with 2 loose threads he'd been meaning to fix. The boots were good boots, just old. He wore them because they were comfortable and because he'd made them himself 12 years ago as a proof of concept that became the first product Tate Collective ever sold. He did not bring a briefcase. He brought a small leather notebook, the kind he'd carried since his 20s. His name wasn't on it. Nothing on the outside marked who he was. That was the point. Caldwell Boutique had been open 4 years. Solomon had invested in it as a silent partner when the original owner, a young designer named Felix, had come to him through a mutual contact with a concept and zero capital. Solomon had believed in Felix's eye, his instinct for curation. He'd put in the money, stayed quiet, let Felix build. The arrangement suited them both. Felix ran the day-to-day. Solomon checked in twice a year, unannounced, to see what the floor looked like when nobody was performing for the boss. He'd done this at every property he had a stake in. Hotels, studios, showrooms. He'd been mistaken for a delivery man, a maintenance worker, a lost tourist. Once, at a restaurant he co-owned, a host had tried to redirect him to the employee's entrance. He always said the same thing afterward. "The way you treat someone who can hurt you tells me everything about who you are." He took a cab to the boutique. No driver, no assistant. He watched the city out the window. Caldwell Boutique occupied a corner space in the arts district. Glass frontage, brushed steel fixtures, curated minimalism that cost more to achieve than most people understood. Felix had good taste. The window display was clean and striking. Solomon approved of it quietly as he pushed through the front door. The bell above the door made a soft sound. Cool air, cedar diffusers, low music. A jazz pianist Solomon actually recognized. Good sign. He moved toward the main floor. There were 3 staff members visible. A young woman near the register, talking quietly on a headset. A man with a measuring tape slung around his neck helping a couple near the back. And a 3rd employee. Tall, broad-shouldered name tag that read Wadi is standing near the center rack of outerwear, adjusting hangers with the focused energy of someone who had decided the jackets were his personal responsibility. Solomon moved toward the rack. He was looking at a piece he'd designed himself, a waxed cotton field coat in dark olive, double-stitched at the shoulders, with a hidden interior pocket he'd spent 3 weeks perfecting. It had taken Tate Collective 7 months to bring it to production. It retailed at $890. He reached for it. "Get your hands off that jacket. That's not for people like you." The room stilled. Solomon looked at the man. Wade was maybe 28. Good posture, practiced confidence, the kind of surface polish that came from being told you were impressive before you'd done anything worth being impressed by. His eyes had done the same calculation every pair of eyes in retail eventually did. A fast scan, clothes to shoes, posture to expression, a verdict rendered before a word was spoken. Solomon's boots, his canvas jacket, the notebook sticking out of his pocket. Verdict, does not belong. "Excuse me," Solomon's voice was quiet. "You heard me." Wade moved in front of the rack. "We have a sales section in the back, past the denim wall, if you're looking for something more in your range." The woman at the register had looked up. The couple near the back had gone still. Solomon said, "I'd like to see this jacket." "That piece is $900. Wade said it the way people say things they want to sting. "Is that something you're prepared for today, or would you like me to point you to something more accessible?" "More accessible." Solomon repeated the phrase. "That's what I said." "I'd still like to see the jacket." Wade's expression shifted from dismissive to something colder. He picked up a walkie-talkie from the counter behind him. Not a phone, a walkie-talkie, the kind security used, and pressed the button. "Hey, Brent. Front floor. Guest who might need some direction." The couple near the back exchanged a look. The man, who was black, put his hand on his partner's arm. A second man emerged from a back hallway. Brent, according to his name tag, was the boutique's floor manager. 40s, button-down shirt, the kind of posture that came with a title. He assessed the situation in about 1 second and walked over. "Can I help you find something?" The tone was not helpful. It was the tone people used when they meant, "Can I help you leave?" "I'm looking at the field coat," Solomon said. "That's a $900 piece." "You've mentioned the price twice," Solomon said. "I heard you the first time." Brent's jaw tightened. "We just want to make sure our guests are aware of what they're." "Do you say that to everyone who touches the rack, or just me?" Silence. The woman at the register had stopped pretending to work. She was watching. Brent said, "We've had some issues with merchandise being handled inappropriately by people who look like me." Brent didn't answer, which was an answer. Solomon took the notebook from his pocket. He opened it to a clean page. He wrote 2 things down. The time, Wade's name. "What are you doing?" Wade asked. "Taking notes." "You can't just..." Wade glanced at Brent. "He can't just stand here." "He's a customer," the woman at the register said suddenly. Her voice was tighter than she'd meant it to be. Both men turned to look at her. She looked back, didn't flinch, but her hands gripped the edge of the counter. Her name tag said, Renata. "Renata," Brent said. "Go check on inventory." She didn't move. "He hasn't done anything wrong." "Renata." She looked at Solomon. Her expression said, "I'm sorry. I can't do more than this." But she'd done something, and Solomon noted it. He turned back to the jacket. He lifted it off the rack himself, turned it over, examined the stitching at the shoulder. His stitching, the double pass technique he developed in 2017 after a customer complained about seam failure. Checked the interior pocket, ran his thumb along the welt. Good production quality. The manufacturer in North Carolina had done exactly what he'd asked. "You need to put that down," Wade said. "No," Solomon said. "I don't." He walked to the nearest mirror and held the jacket against himself. Checked the shoulder width. He would have sized it a 1/4 inch wider in the arm. He made a note. Brent stepped closer. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "On what grounds?" "You're making our staff uncomfortable." "Your staff made a decision about who I was before I said a single word." Solomon set the jacket on a nearby table. "Carefully, precisely, the way you handled something valuable. That's what's making everyone uncomfortable. Not me." A beat of silence. The couple near the back had not moved. The man was filming on his phone, held low at his side. The front door opened. Felix Arnault walked in, slightly breathless, a leather tote bag over one shoulder, reading something on his phone. He was mid-30s, French-Algerian, quick-moving, the kind of person who was always slightly more rushed than the situation required. He looked up. He saw Salman first. His face did something complicated. Then he saw Brent, then Wade. He said, "Oh no." Salman said, "Felix." Felix stopped walking. "How long?" "About 12 minutes. Felix closed his eyes for 2 full seconds. Then he opened them and walked directly to Brent. "This is Solomon Tate." Brent's expression didn't change. "I don't." "He designed the jacket you just told him he couldn't touch." Felix's voice had gone very quiet, the way voices went when someone was working extremely hard to stay controlled. "He designed half the pieces on this floor. He has a 49% stake in this boutique." A pause. "He is the reason any of us are standing in this room right now." The color drained from Brent's face in stages, like water receding. Wade made a sound, not a word, just a sound. Solomon picked the jacket up from the table. He put it back on the rack himself, straightened the hanger, smoothed the collar. He turned to Felix. "The shoulder seam on the field coat. I want to revisit the arm width for the fall run. A 1/4 inch in the sleeve, left and right." Felix was already writing. Solomon walked toward the door. "Wait." It was Wade. His voice had changed completely, the polish gone, something younger and more frightened underneath. I didn't know who you were." Solomon stopped. He turned around. He looked at Wade for a long moment. "I know you didn't," he said. "That's the whole problem." He walked out. He stood on the sidewalk in the morning sun, notebook in hand, the canvas jacket, the old boots, the city going on around him. His phone buzzed twice. Felix, he assumed. He didn't look at it yet. He thought about the couple inside, the man with his phone held low, filming. He thought about Renata, who had said he hasn't done anything wrong when it would have been easier not to. He thought about how many people walk through that door every week and never got that sense from anyone. He pulled out his phone, not Felix, his daughter. How'd it go? He stood there on the corner for a moment. A cab passed. A woman walked by with a coffee and a dog and didn't look at him at all, which felt like its own kind of relief. He typed back, "It went." Then he hailed a cab and went back to the studio. The meeting happened 2 days later. Solomon's office, 8th floor, windows facing east. The table seated 12. Felix sat on Solomon's left. The boutique's HR consultant, a woman named Beverly Okafor, who had the energy of someone who had cleaned up messes like this before, sat across from them. 2 board members called in from out of state. Legal was on the line. Brent did not attend. He'd been placed on administrative leave the morning after. Wade had been terminated the same afternoon Solomon left the boutique. Felix had made that call before he'd even left the building, on his phone in the back office, hands shaking. Solomon had watched the security footage before the meeting, 41 minutes of it. Brent's treatment of 3 other customers before Solomon arrived, 2 black men and a Latina woman, each interaction carrying the same charge, the same unspoken decision made before a word was exchanged. One of them had bought nothing. One had bought something small, clearly settling. One had left immediately. None of them had said anything, because what were they going to say, and to whom, and would anyone have listened? Solomon laid the footage on the table. "Pattern and practice," Beverly said quietly. "Yes," Solomon said. Felix stared at his hands. "I didn't know. I want to be clear that I genuinely did not know." "That's the second problem," Solomon said. "You should have systems in place to know. Complaint channels, anonymous reporting, someone whose job it is to ask customers how they were treated." He paused. "You built something beautiful in that space, but beauty doesn't protect people if the floor culture is rotten." Felix nodded. He looked like he hadn't slept. "So we fix it," Solomon said. "That's why we're here." The changes were not cosmetic. Every Caldwell location, there were 3, underwent a full audit by an external firm that specialized in retail bias assessment. Every employee went through a mandatory training program that Solomon personally reviewed before approving. The complaint system Beverly designed gave customers a direct line that went to Solomon's office, not the boutique floor. Renata was promoted to assistant floor manager. Felix had pushed for it. Solomon had approved it in under 30 seconds. The couple from the boutique, their names were Adrian and Simone Okafor, no relation to Beverly, a coincidence that everyone noted with the kind of tired humor that sometimes accompanied situations like this, had been contacted. They had a conversation with Solomon directly. Adrian had been treated the same way as Solomon. Different words, same verdict, same invisible wall. He hadn't said anything because he'd been through it before, and experience had taught him that saying something only made it worse. Simone had cried on the phone. Not from sadness, she said, from the relief of being believed. The man who had filmed, his name was Curtis Webb, a 26-year-old graduate student who had been in the boutique returning a gift, sent the footage to Solomon directly after Felix posted a short statement on the boutique's social accounts. He did not post it publicly. He said, "I wasn't sure what the right thing to do was. I wanted you to have it." Solomon called him. They talked for 40 minutes about the industry, about the city, about what it meant to see something and not look away. Solomon offered him a paid internship with Tate Collector's design team. Curtis said he'd think about it. He accepted 2 days later. The footage never went viral. That was different from the way these stories usually went. Solomon had the option to release it, to let the public machinery do what it did. The hashtags, the news bans, the cycle of outrage, and then silence. He chose not to, not because he was protecting anyone who deserved protecting, because he'd spent 3 decades building something, and he wanted the response to be about that something, about what it stood for, what it demanded of the people inside it, not about the performance of accountability that happened on screens and then evaporated. He gave one interview. The journalist was a woman named Patricia Osei, who covered business and culture for a national publication. She was sharp, patient, asked questions that went somewhere. She asked him the same thing the journalist in the boutique story always asked. Why didn't you identify yourself sooner? Why let it go that far? Solomon thought about it for a moment. He was quiet long enough that she didn't fill the silence, which he respected. Because every other person who walks through that door doesn't get to identify themselves as someone worth respecting, he said. They just have to walk in and hope. I wanted to know what that felt like for them. I already knew what it felt like. I wanted to make sure I hadn't forgotten. She printed it. People read it. The conversation was different from the usual conversation. Slower, less hot, more specific. Industry publications picked it up. 2 other retail groups reached out to Beverly Okafor's consulting firm within the month. A year later, Solomon walked into Caldwell Boutique on a Thursday morning. Canvas jacket, old boots, notebook in his pocket. Renata was at the front desk. She looked up and smiled. A real smile, the kind that didn't calculate anything. Morning. The new waxed linen pieces came in yesterday. I think you'll want to see the charcoal. I'll take a look, Solomon said. The floor was warm. The music was something slow and good. A couple stood near the outerwear, black, mid-40s at ease. A young woman with a stroller examined a display near the window. A teenage boy in a hoodie stood near the rack of field coats, hand on the sleeve, considering. Nobody moved toward him. Nobody made a calculation. Nobody said anything except what was true, which was, "You're here and you're welcome," and the charcoal linen just came in. Solomon walked to the rack. He pulled out the field coat in the dark olive revised shoulder, 1/4 inch wider in the sleeve, just how he'd wanted it. He held it in his hands for a moment. He put it on. It fit. He stood in front of the same mirror he'd stood in front of 14 months ago, when a man who didn't know his name had decided in the space of a second who he was and what he was worth. He looked at himself, scuffed boots, steady eyes, a jacket that belonged to him in every way a thing could belong to a person. He thought about the couple whose names he'd learned. He thought about Renata, who had said he hasn't done anything wrong out loud, in a room where it would have been easier not to. He thought about Curtis, who had filmed and then done the harder thing, waited, thought, made a choice. He thought about the customers he'd never meet, who walked into rooms every day and were scanned and sorted before they opened their mouths, and who had no folder, no deed, no 49% stake to hand across a table. Those are the people the work is for. He took the jacket off, folded it over his arm, walked to the counter. "I'll take it," he said. Renata smiled. "Good choice." He paid. He walked out into the morning. The city was loud and indifferent and full of people moving in every direction, and none of them knew his name, and that was fine. He pulled on the jacket and kept walking. Here's what stays with him, though. Not the moment the room went silent. Not Wade's face when Felix said his name. Not even the security footage. All that proof. All those silent witnesses. What stays is the boy in the hoodie, standing at the rack, hand on the sleeve. 14 months ago, he would have been followed, would have been watched, would have felt it, that pressure, that presence, that invisible verdict, even if no one said a word out loud. In the morning, Solomon walked back in. Nobody moved. That's the difference. Not the lawsuit, not the press, not the industry report. The difference is a kid standing at a rack with his hand on a jacket and nobody deciding anything except that he's allowed to be there. So ask yourself this. The last time you watched someone being scanned in a room sized up, sorted, quietly turned away, did you say anything? Did you do anything? Or did you hold your coffee and look somewhere else and tell yourself it wasn't your moment? Because here's what Solomon Tate would tell you. It doesn't take a name on the building. It doesn't take a stake in the company. It just takes someone in the room willing to say what Renata said. He hasn't done anything wrong. That's it. That's the whole thing. I keep coming back to the moment Solomon put the jacket back on the rack himself. He could have held on to it. He could have made a point of it. But he folded it carefully, smoothed the collar, straightened the hanger, and that small act said more than any confrontation could have. That's what I think about when I think about integrity. Not the big speeches, not the moment the room goes silent when everyone finally understands who they're dealing with. It's what you do with your hands when you're the only one watching. Solomon had built that jacket. He knew every stitch in it, and he treated it with the same care whether he was the unknown man in scuffed boots or the name on the deed. That's not performance. That's character. And character is the thing that holds when everything else falls apart. What happened to Solomon in that boutique wasn't an accident. Wade didn't trip and fall into prejudice. He made a decision. Fast, automatic, built from habits he probably never examined. And that decision had a cost, not just for Solomon, for the couple who had come in before him, for the woman who'd bought something small when she deserved the full experience, for Renata, who had to choose between her job and her conscience and somehow found the courage to choose both at once. Cause and effect doesn't always arrive loud. Sometimes it accumulates quietly, customer by customer, silence by silence, until the weight of it becomes undeniable. What strikes me about Solomon is that he never stopped thinking clearly, even in the middle of something humiliating. He took out his notebook. He wrote down the time. He asked the question nobody wanted to answer. Do you say this to everyone who touches the rack, or just me? That's not anger. That's precision. That's a mind that refuses to be rattled out of its own clarity. There's a kind of intelligence in knowing what questions to ask when the room is trying to make you feel like you don't belong, and then asking them anyway. Calmly, out loud. And then there's what he did with the resolution. He had the footage. He had the witnesses. He had every reason to let it go public and let the machinery run. He chose not to. He chose the slower, harder thing. The audit, the training, the structural change, the conversation with Adrian and Simone that actually addressed what they'd been through. That takes a different kind of strength than the one people usually celebrate. It's the strength that doesn't need an audience. The strength that asks, what will actually make this better, not just feel better? Renata said 5 words. He hasn't done anything wrong. She said them in a room where it would have been easier to stay quiet, where staying quiet had a professional excuse attached to it. She said them anyway. I think about her every time I'm in a situation where the easier thing and the right thing are not the same thing. Most of us get those moments more often than we'd like to admit. What Renata understood, maybe without even framing it this way, is that silence in the face of something wrong is its own kind of choice. And choices have weight. The boy in the hoodie standing at the rack at the end. That's the image I can't shake. He didn't know any of this had happened. He just walked in, found a jacket he liked, and stood there considering it without anyone deciding anything about him in advance. That's what the work was for. Not the settlement. Not the headline. That moment, that ordinary Thursday morning. That kid with his hand on the sleeve. That's what it looks like when things are right.